You've noticed it, haven't you? That restlessness when the room goes quiet. That urge to fill the space with sound, with movement, with anything but the stillness. What are you really running from? There's a moment that arrives uninvited. You're alone in your room. The phone is face down. The television is off. No music plays. And suddenly, the silence becomes thick, almost suffocating. Your mind reaches for distraction like a drowning man reaches for shore. You pick up your phone. You scroll. You put on a podcast, a song, white noise, something to drown out the quiet. And for a moment, relief washes over you. The discomfort fades. The emptiness fills. But here's what strange silence is: just the absence of sound. It's neutral. It doesn't threaten you. It doesn't judge you. So why does it feel like an enemy? Because silence does something most of us have learned to fear. It removes the curtain. It pulls back the veil between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. And in that space, everything you've been avoiding rises to the surface. Think of your mind as a pond. During the day, you throw stones into it constantly. Thoughts, tasks, conversations, worries, plans. The water stays disturbed, rippling endlessly. You never see what lies beneath. But when the stones stop, when the world goes quiet, the water begins to still. And slowly things you've buried start floating up. That argument you never resolved. That dream you gave up on. That version of yourself you promised you'd become but didn't. That loneliness you've dressed up as independence. That fear you've disguised as ambition. They all live in the silence, waiting. And so you've trained yourself to avoid it. Not consciously, perhaps, but deeply. You've built a life that hums with noise. Background noise. Productive noise. Social noise. You fill every gap, every pause, every moment of potential stillness with something external. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. You work with music in your ears. You drive with the radio on. You eat while watching something. You sleep with videos playing. The silence never gets a turn. But here's the truth that cuts through all of it. The discomfort you feel in silence isn't coming from the silence itself. It's coming from what the silence reveals. It's the discomfort of meeting yourself without distraction, without performance, without the roles you play or the masks you wear. Silence is a mirror. And most of us have forgotten what we look like. We've become strangers to our own inner world. We know our social media feeds better than we know our own hearts. We can tell you what's trending, but not what we're truly feeling. We've outsourced our sense of self to external validation, constant stimulation, and the endless rhythm of productivity. And in that trade, we've lost something essential: the ability to simply be. Not be productive, not be entertaining, not be useful or impressive or likable, just to exist quietly in our own presence. This isn't a new problem. The mystics spoke of it centuries ago. The Sufis called it ghafla, heedlessness. A state of being so distracted by the surface of life that you forget the depth. You mistake the waves for the ocean. You confuse the noise for the music. Alan Watts used to say that we've become a civilization that confuses the menu with the meal. We consume symbols of living rather than living itself. We photograph sunsets instead of watching them. We document experiences instead of having them. And we fill silence instead of entering it. Because entering silence requires something we've been taught to fear: vulnerability. When you sit in silence, you can't hide behind your achievements. You can't distract yourself with business. You can't perform your way out of discomfort. You simply have to be with what is. And what is often is uncomfortable. It's the gap between who you are and who you thought you'd be by now. It's the awareness that time is passing and you're still waiting to feel ready. It's the recognition that you've been running in circles, chasing things that don't actually fulfill you. Silence reveals the truth, and truth, unadorned, can feel unbearable, so you avoid it. You call it boredom. You call it unproductive. You tell yourself you'll sit with the silence later, when things calm down, when you have time. But that time never comes, because you keep scheduling over it. You keep choosing noise, and with each choice, the distance grows. Between you and yourself. Between the life you're living and the life that's actually yours to live. Between the person you show the world and the person you are when no one's watching. The discomfort you feel in silence is your soul trying to reach you. It's the deepest part of you, the part beneath all the conditioning and expectations, tapping on the glass, asking to be seen, asking to be heard. But you've built a world so loud that you can barely hear the knocking. Let me tell you what silence actually is. It's not emptiness. It's not absence. Silence is the presence of everything you've been too busy to notice. When you remove the noise, what remains isn't nothing. It's you, the real you, not the curated version, not the productive version, not the version that performs well in meetings or looks good in photos. The you that exists before language, before identity, before all the stories you've told yourself about who you need to be. And meeting that version of yourself can feel like meeting a stranger. We spend so much energy constructing ourselves, building our personalities, crafting our image, developing our skills and our status and our sense of self. We become experts at being the person we think we should be. But in all that construction, we often forget to ask, who am I when I stop trying? Silence answers that question. But the answer isn't always comfortable. Because in silence, you realize how much of your identity is borrowed. How many of your opinions aren't really yours, but absorbed from others? How many of your desires are actually someone else's definition of success? How much of your life is lived on autopilot, following scripts you never consciously chose? The Buddhist teachers speak of this as the discovery of anatta, the insight that the self you think you are is largely constructed. It's a collection of habits, memories, and reactions held together by narrative. And when you sit in silence long enough, the narrative starts to dissolve. The constructed self loosens its grip. This is terrifying, because if you're not the story you've been telling, then who are you? But it's also liberating, because it means you're not bound by that story. You're not trapped in the patterns you've identified with. You're far more vast, more fluid, more fundamentally free than you've been taught to believe. Silence reveals this. It shows you that beneath all the noise, beneath all the becoming and achieving and proving, there's a stillness that has always been there, a presence that doesn't need to be earned or maintained, a being that exists before and beyond all your attempts to define it. The Sufis have a beautiful way of describing this. They say that the world is like a drum, and most people spend their lives beating it, trying to make noise, trying to be heard. But the wise person learns to listen to the silence between the beats, because that's where the real music lies. Your discomfort with silence is actually your ego sensing its own impermanence. The ego thrives on activity, on doing, on maintaining the story of who you are. It needs constant reinforcement, constant stimulation, constant proof that you exist, that you matter, that you're making progress. But silence asks nothing of your ego. It doesn't care about your accomplishments. It doesn't validate your identity. It simply is. And in that neutrality, the ego feels threatened. It whispers, "This is boring. This is pointless. You should be doing something. You should be productive. You're wasting time." These thoughts aren't truth. They're protection. The ego protecting itself from its own dissolution. Because in deep silence, you discover something profound. You don't actually need the constant chatter to exist. You don't need the endless doing to be worthy. You don't need the noise to be real. You are already whole. You have always been whole. The silence doesn't create this wholeness. It reveals it. This is why meditation can feel so difficult at first. You sit down with the intention of being quiet, and immediately your mind floods with thoughts. Worries about the future, regrets about the past, plans and fantasies and judgments. The mind does everything it can to avoid the simplicity of just sitting, because just sitting threatens the entire system you've built. The system that says you're only valuable when you're producing. You're only worthy when you're improving. You're only real when you're externally validated. Silence dismantles that system, gently but completely. And this is uncomfortable not because something is wrong, but because something is right. The discomfort is the sound of old structures cracking, old beliefs dissolving, old identities loosening their hold. You've been taught that discomfort means you're doing something wrong. But sometimes discomfort means you're finally doing something real. You're finally touching the truth beneath all the conditioning. You're finally meeting yourself as you actually are, not as you've been told to be. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. That was in the 17th century. Imagine what he'd say now, in an age where we carry infinite distraction in our pockets. We've become so skilled at avoiding ourselves. We've built entire industries around helping us escape our own presence. Entertainment streaming endlessly, social media scrolling infinitely, news updating constantly. We can go days, weeks, even years without encountering genuine silence. And we call this progress. We call this connection. We call this living. But what if the opposite is true? What if in our rush to fill every moment, we've actually emptied our lives of meaning? What if in our constant connection to everything external, we've disconnected from everything internal? What if the silence you're avoiding is exactly what you need? Not because it will make you more productive, not because it will make you happier in some superficial way, but because it will make you more real, more honest, more aligned with the truth of who you actually are beneath all the noise. The discomfort is the price of that honesty, and it's a price worth paying. There's a particular quality to the discomfort that comes with silence. It's not sharp or urgent. It's more like a low hum of anxiety, a restlessness that makes you want to move, to act, to fill the space with anything at all. This restlessness is actually information. It's your nervous system telling you something important. For so long, You've been in motion, externally busy, internally scattered, and your system has adapted to that state. It has learned to expect stimulation. It has become calibrated to noise. So when the noise stops, your system doesn't relax, it panics. It interprets the absence of stimulation as a threat, because from its perspective, stillness is vulnerability. When you're still, you're exposed. When you're quiet, you're unprotected. This is the legacy of survival. For thousands of years, staying alert meant staying alive. Our ancestors couldn't afford to rest completely. They needed to remain vigilant, aware of danger, ready to move. But you're not in that environment anymore. The threats your nervous system is scanning for mostly don't exist. The predator isn't coming. The danger isn't real. But your body hasn't learned this yet. It still treats silence like exposure, like risk. So part of the work of reclaiming silence is teaching your nervous system that it's safe. That stillness isn't vulnerability. That you don't need to fill every moment with activity to survive. This is a practice, not a one-time realization. You have to train yourself back into presence, back into the ability to simply be without doing, to exist without proving, to rest without guilt. And the beautiful thing is, the more you practice, the more you discover what silence actually offers. It's not empty. It's full of subtlety, full of nuance, full of depth that you can only perceive when you slow down enough to notice. In silence, you begin to hear your own intuition. That quiet voice beneath all the shoulds and supposed toes. The voice that knows what you actually need, not what you've been told to want. The voice that guided you before you learned to doubt it. You begin to feel the rhythm of your own being, the natural cycles of energy and rest, the ebb and flow of your own aliveness. You begin to notice when you're forcing and when you're flowing, when you're performing and when you're being genuine. You begin to sense the presence that exists beneath all experience. The awareness that witnesses your thoughts without being caught in them. The consciousness that holds your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The stillness at the center of your being that never actually moves, no matter how chaotic your life becomes. This is what the mystics have been pointing to for millennia. Not some esoteric state you need to achieve, but a recognition of what's already here, what's always been here, what you are beneath all the layers of conditioning and identity. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." He was talking about the quality of openness that exists before we fill our minds with knowing, the spaciousness that exists before we clutter it with conclusions. Silence returns you to beginner's mind. It clears the clutter. It dissolves the certainty that keeps you trapped in old patterns. It creates space for something new to emerge, not something you manufacture, but something that arises naturally when you stop forcing. This is why creative people speak of their best ideas coming in silence, in the shower, on a walk, in the space between sleep and waking. Not because they're trying to think of something, but because they've stopped trying. They've created space. And in that space, something deeper can surface. Your discomfort with silence is actually your resistance to this process. Your resistance to letting go of control. Your resistance to trusting what arises naturally instead of what you force into being. Because silence requires surrender. It requires you to stop managing your experience. Stop curating your thoughts. Stop performing your identity. It asks you to trust that if you simply rest in awareness, what needs to emerge will emerge. What needs to be known will be known. What needs to happen will happen. This is a radical trust, and it goes against everything you've been taught. You've been taught to make things happen, to stay in control, to never stop pushing, to fill every gap with effort. But silence teaches a different way, the way of allowing, the way of receptivity, the way of trust. Rumi wrote, "Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. But you can't feel that pull if you're always making noise. You can't be drawn if you're always pushing. You can't receive guidance if you're always broadcasting. Silence is the practice of listening instead of speaking, receiving instead of transmitting, being instead of becoming. And yes, it's uncomfortable, because it means releasing control. It means admitting you don't have all the answers. It means trusting something larger than your individual will. But here's what you discover on the other side of that discomfort: you're not alone. You've never been alone. Beneath all the noise, there's a connection to something vast. Something that holds you. Something that's been carrying you all along. Even when you thought you were carrying yourself. Some people call this God. Some call it the universe. Some call it consciousness or presence or the Tao. The name doesn't matter. What matters is the felt sense of being held by something larger than your small self. Something that doesn't need your effort to exist. Something that simply is, whether you acknowledge it or not. Silence opens the door to that presence, not through belief, but through direct experience, through the simple act of stopping, resting, being still enough to notice what's always been here. So what do you do with this? How do you actually begin to befriend the silence you've been avoiding? You start small. You don't need to sit in meditation for an hour. You don't need to go on a silent retreat. You just need to create small pockets of genuine quiet in your day. And when the discomfort arises, you don't run from it. You stay. You breathe. You notice. Maybe it's 3 minutes in the morning before you reach for your phone. Just sitting on the edge of your bed, feeling your breath, noticing the quality of light coming through the window. Not trying to feel anything in particular. Just being present to what is. Maybe it's turning off the music during your commute, driving in silence, walking in silence, letting your mind wander without filling the space with podcasts or calls. Just being with the movement of your body and the thoughts that arise. Maybe it's eating one meal without screens, without reading, without background noise, just tasting the food, feeling the texture, noticing the act of nourishing yourself without distraction. These are small rebellions against the tyranny of noise. Small acts of reclaiming your inner life from the constant demand for external stimulation. And when you do this, when you create these moments of silence, the discomfort will come. Your mind will tell you this is boring. Your body will want to move. Your hand will reach for your phone almost automatically. This is where the practice lies. Not in achieving some blissful state, but in noticing the impulse to escape and choosing to stay anyway. Not with force, not with judgment, but with gentle awareness. Oh, there's that pull toward distraction. There's that discomfort with simply being. interesting. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to make it go away. You just need to notice it, to see it clearly. Because in seeing it clearly, you begin to disidentify from it. You realize that you're not the discomfort. You're the one noticing the discomfort. You're the awareness that holds all experience, comfortable and uncomfortable alike. This shift in perspective is everything. It means you don't have to wait until you feel comfortable with silence to practice it. You can be uncomfortable and still choose to stay. You can feel restless and still choose to be still. You can notice the urge to distract yourself and still choose presence. Over time, something changes. Not because you've conquered the discomfort, but because you've changed your relationship to it. It becomes less threatening, less urgent, less defining. It's just another sensation moving through. Another wave on the surface of a much deeper ocean. And in that ocean, you find what you've been looking for all along, not in the noise, not in the constant doing, not in the external validation or achievements or distractions, but in the simple, profound fact of your own being. You realize that you don't need to be more than you are. You don't need to do more to be worthy. You don't need to prove your existence through constant activity. You're already here. You've always been here. And that's enough. This is the gift silence offers, not some mystical experience, not some permanent state of bliss, but a reconnection with your own essential okayness, a remembering that beneath all the striving and seeking and performing, there's a being that doesn't need any of that, a being that is complete in itself, a being that is, in fact, you. The silence isn't your enemy. It never was. It's the space where you remember yourself, where you come home to the truth of your own presence, where you discover that everything you've been seeking in the noise has been waiting for you in the quiet all along. So the next time silence feels uncomfortable, don't run, stay. Breathe, listen. You might be surprised by what you hear. Not the answers to all your questions, not the solution to all your problems, but something more fundamental, the sound of your own existence, the rhythm of your own being, the quiet certainty that you are here, you are real, and you are enough. That's what silence has been trying to tell you all along.